But Baalbek, if there was one example, one ancient site on Earth that is evidence of a lost, ancient, advanced civilization,
Baalbek has always looked impossible. Stones the size of train cars stacked on a hill in Lebanon, fitted so tightly that even a thin card cannot slip between them.
This is the real mystery of Baalbek. How these stones came to be there, why they were placed there, and specifically how they were transported into place.
For years, people blamed giants, lost builders, and even aliens. But when AI scanned the site layer by layer, the truth finally surfaced. Clear, undeniable, and far more unsettling than any myth. Inside the giant ruins of Baalbek. High in the Bekaa Valley in eastern Lebanon, there is a hill where normal sense starts to break down. A quiet modern town spreads around it. Cars move along narrow streets, and farms stretch across one of the most fertile valleys in the country. Right above that, everyday life sits a stone platform and a set of temples that once drew people from across the Roman world. The ruins stand on a plateau more than 3,800 feet above sea level, about 40 miles northeast of Beirut, between two long mountain ranges that act like walls around the valley. People have been living on this hill and the land around it for many thousands of years. Early farming villages grew up here because there was water from springs and meltwater from the nearby mountains, and because the valley sat on a natural route between the coast and the deep interior of the Middle East. Over time, the place gained a local god, then a group of gods, and the hilltop became a sacred spot. In the Hellenistic and Roman periods, the town became known as Heliopolis, the Sun City, tied to a powerful sky god who blended local and Roman ideas. When Rome took control, they did not just add a small shrine, they turned the hill into one of the largest temple complexes they ever built. The main gods honored here were Jupiter, Bacchus, and Venus, matched to older local gods that people in the region already knew. The Roman colony grew around the sanctuary, and later Christian and Islamic builders reused parts of the site. In the 20th century, war, airstrikes, and earthquakes hit the surrounding town more than once, yet the core of the Temple Hill still stands. In 1984, the complex became a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as one of the finest examples of high Roman architecture anywhere. Walking into the ancient sacred area, you do not meet the famous stones right away. First came a grand entrance, then a hexagonal forecourt, then a huge main court, all designed to build a sense of scale and power as you climb toward the main temple. The whole layout is not a simple rectangle. It is a chain of spaces that pulls you forward and up, with broad staircases, carved doorways, and long lines of columns on all sides. Even today, when much of it is broken, you can feel how it was meant to overwhelm anyone who climbed those steps. At the far end of that great court once stood the Temple of Jupiter, the main building on the hill. It rose on a tall stone platform.
So I had a lot of speculations before coming to this site. I've been to so many other ancient sites around the world. You know, I've seen some massive stones and
a kind of giant base that lifted the temple another several yards above the rest of the court. The footprint of the temple itself was roughly 290 feet by about 145 feet. Around the edge stood a ring of 54 massive Corinthian columns. Each column was about 65 feet tall and more than 8 feet thick, some of the tallest ever used in a classical temple. Stone beams weighing tens of tons sat across the tops of those columns, roughly 60 feet above the court floor. All of this alone would already make the site extreme by Roman standards. But the real shock sits under and behind that temple. On the west side of the platform, forming part of the retaining wall that holds the whole thing in place, there is a row of 3 giant limestone blocks laid side by side. These are the famous stones that many people now call the trilithon. Each block is about 64 feet long, roughly 14 feet high, and about 12 feet thick. Modern estimates put each block at around 750 to 800 tons. Below them, the next course of the wall is built from normal giants, with blocks around 11 yards wide and weighing in the range of 350 tons each. From below, these 3 upper blocks look like 3 parked train cars of solid rock, fitted so tightly that even a credit card cannot easily slide between them. It is not just the size that stands out, but the way they are lined up, as if someone insisted on absolute straightness and perfect contact along the whole face of the wall. If you leave the Temple Hill and walk south toward the foot of the nearby slope, you come to the quarry that fed the building. It lies about half a mile from the main complex, carved into the lower flank of the anti-Lebanon range. Archaeologists call this area the Hajar al-Hibla quarry, after the best-known block lying there. Studies of the site show that it is not a random hole in the ground. It is a wide extraction area that covers many acres, with several working zones where Roman crews cut out layer after layer of stone. The quarry floor slopes gently toward the northwest at around 15 degrees and sits slightly higher than the temple podium, a detail that will matter when people start to think about how the stones were meant to be moved. Right at the edge of this quarry lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, the block that gives the place its modern Arabic name. It is a single cut piece of limestone, about 68 feet long, roughly 13 feet high, and about 14 feet across. Its weight is estimated at around 1,000 tons. Many travelers saw this stone long before the site was properly studied. In the late 1990s, a second giant block was identified in the same quarry, now often called the Stone of the South. This one is slightly shorter in length, but a little thicker and taller. Its dimensions suggest a weight of roughly 1,240 tons, making it even heavier than the Stone of the Pregnant Woman. Then, in the summer of 2014, a team from the German Archaeological Institute and the Lebanese University cleared more of the quarry floor and found a third, even larger block lying just below and beside the famous stone. This forgotten stone is about 64 feet long, around 20 feet wide, and at least 18 feet high in the parts that have been measured, with an estimated weight of around 1,600 to 1,700 tons. It is, as far as we know today, the largest single-worked stone block ever cut in the ancient world. The quarry has been studied in detail by archaeologist Jeanine Abdul-Masih and her team. Their work shows that these giants are not freak objects left by some unknown builders, but part of a much larger, planned Roman quarry system. The team mapped 4 main extraction areas and traced the cut faces where blocks were freed from the bedrock. Around the big stones, they found narrow trenches where workers had cut down along all sides, leaving the blocks still attached at the bottom. In some places, they could see marks where rollers had once been laid under smaller blocks, and even circular wear marks on the rock that matched the action of capstans, the rotating posts used to wind ropes and pull heavy loads. All of these point to a worksite that was active during the Roman imperial project and run by crews who understood exactly what they were doing. If you step back from the individual stones and look at the platform as a whole, another pattern appears. The base under the Temple of Jupiter is not just a single solid block of masonry. Archaeologists have shown that it is built in steps and layers, with an inner core and an outer shell. Modern writers often use the terms Podium 1 for the main base and Podium 2 for the huge outer wall section that wraps around part of it, including the side with the trilithon. In the last few decades, the way we look at Baalbek has changed again, this time because of new digital tools and artificial intelligence. Survey teams have used terrestrial laser scanners, high-end cameras, and drones to capture the site in 3 dimensions, down to details of a few millimeters. Leica Geosystems turned the ruins into precise 3-dimensional models for research and conservation, while a project called Baalbek Reborn Temples lets anyone with a phone or computer move through a virtual version of the sanctuary and quarry. These scans record not just the size of each block, but tiny shifts, chips, and wear patterns on their surfaces.
Before the Roman temple was this spaceport platform that was apparently used for extraterrestrials coming and going on planet Earth.
Those digital models now sit behind much of the newer work on Baalbek. They give exact numbers for stone sizes, angles, and positions, and they capture the link between the quarry, the podium, and the temples in a way that older sketches never could. So, how do you move and place stones this size without the machines we use today? The hard truth about moving these stones. Across the ancient world, there are not many stones in this weight class that we know were actually moved. In Egypt, the huge seated statues known as the Colossi of Memnon each weigh around 720 tons, carved from single blocks of sandstone and hauled more than 400 miles from quarries near modern Cairo to the west bank of the Nile at Luxor. In Jerusalem, one of the largest blocks in the Western Wall tunnels, the so-called Great Stone, is about 45 feet long and weighs somewhere between roughly 300 and a little over 500 tons. Large Egyptian obelisks and roof slabs in royal tombs usually sit in the 200 to 300 ton range. The trilithon blocks at Baalbek are bigger than all of those. That is why engineers pay so much attention to it. If these blocks were moved with tools that people 2,000 years ago really had, they show the upper limits of what pre-industrial engineering can do. To see how that might work, it helps to look at what Roman lifting gear could actually handle. Roman builders did not just drag everything by hand. They had cranes made from wooden frames, ropes, and pulley blocks. The smallest types could lift only a few hundred pounds. The more complex types, with many pulleys and sometimes big human-powered wheels that men walked inside, could lift several tons with a small crew. For very heavy pieces, Roman engineers did not rely on a single crane. They built tall wooden towers around the object they wanted to raise. At the Temple of Jupiter itself, the stone beams above the huge columns weigh up to about 60 tons, and one corner block weighs over 100 tons. In Rome, the Capitol block on top of Trajan's column is a little over 50 tons and sits more than 110 feet in the air. Researchers think crews lifted loads like this by tying several large winches and vertical posts together around the tower and hauling in the ropes step by step. That is already intense work, but the trilithon blocks are several times heavier than any of those known lifts. No single Roman crane, no matter how many pulleys it had, could safely lift 800 tons straight into the air. That means the main way to handle stones on this scale is not to hang them from a hook, but to slide them, roll them, and nudge them very slowly into place. All through the ancient world, the basic heavy-moving toolkit looks very similar. Builders put big stones on wooden sledges or frames. They laid round timbers or wooden rails under the load. They covered the path with planks, crushed stone, or packed earth to make it flat and firm. They used rope teams, sometimes tied to large vertical posts in the ground that workers could slowly turn to pull the load. In some cases, like Egypt's pyramid works, there is good evidence that workers poured water on sand in front of the sled so the surface would stiffen just enough to cut the drag almost in half. Modern tests showed that these methods really work. In one set of experiments described by physicists from Amsterdam, teams pulled heavy stone blocks on sledges over dry sand and then over slightly wet sand. With the right amount of water, the sand grains locked together, the sled stayed on top instead of digging in, and the pulling force dropped by about 50%. At Stonehenge, student groups and engineers have dragged multi-ton blocks on wooden sleds over short tracks, finding that 10 people could move a several-ton block at a slow walking pace when the path was prepared properly. On Easter Island, teams working with anthropologist Carl Lipo showed that tall statues weighing several tons could be walked forward in an upright position using ropes and careful rocking. All of these tests point to the same basic truth. With enough people, good ropes, and a smooth track, pre-industrial teams can move loads that, at first glance, seem far too heavy. The question at Baalbek is not whether people can ever move an 800-ton stone. The question is what exact mix of track, sled, earthworks, and pulling system can handle something that large over that specific ground without the whole setup breaking apart. Several serious engineering studies have tried to answer that. In the 1970s, French archaeologist and architect Jean-Pierre Adam published a paper on the trilithon. He looked at ancient writings on heavy transport, at Roman building methods, and at the shape of the hill and quarry. He suggested that crews could have built an earthen ramp from the quarry to the podium, kept the path at a gentle slope, and used large wooden sledges, timber rollers, and groups of upright posts with ropes wrapped around them to pull the blocks forward step by step. Later, a more recent paper picked up that line of thought and treated the whole thing like a modern heavy-haul job. The authors looked at the shape of the ground, the distance from the quarry to the podium, and the expected weight of the blocks. They argued that a mix of ramps, wooden tracks, winches, rollers, and those same turning posts could, in theory, bring a block from the quarry edge onto a prepared trench or platform next to the wall. From there, it could be inched sideways into its final position. They stressed that this would not be easy. It would need careful planning, a great deal of timber and strong rope, but they did not see it as outside the reach of a large Roman state project. To get a feeling for the limits, it helps to strip the problem down to simple forces. When you pull a sled on a flat surface, you are fighting mostly friction, which is just a word for how rough surfaces grab against each other. On a well-prepared wooden track, the friction between wood and wood can be low enough that the pulling force is only a small slice of the total weight. Experiments and basic physics both suggest that, under good conditions, a few thousand people or a mix of people and animals can drag loads in the tens or hundreds of tons. As the load climbs toward the size of the Baalbek blocks, though, the margin for error gets very thin. If the soil under the track is soft, it can crush and sink. If the rollers bunch up or tilt, the sled can jam or twist. If a major rope snaps, the whole setup can jerk suddenly and crack the stone or even cause the ramp to collapse. This is where the shape of the land around Baalbek matters. The quarry lies slightly higher than the podium. That means a smart crew can aim for a path that uses a slight downward slope and then control the movement with wedges and ropes so the block does not run away from them. The hardest part of the move is not the middle of the journey. It is the start and the end. To start, crews have to lift the block just enough to slide rollers or timbers underneath without cracking the stone. That can be done by prying up one end a few inches at a time and packing wood under it in layers, a method often called cribbing. At the end, once the block reaches the podium, it has to be seated at exactly the right height and angle. Because the quarry is a bit higher than the temple platform, one practical trick is to build an earthen terrace or ramp right up to the level of the final course. Instead of lifting the stone 12 or 20 feet straight into the air, crews could drag it along that raised earth until it sits where the wall will be. Then they can remove the earth around it once the structure is finished. This idea is not guesswork from nowhere. It fits with how big ramps were used at many other ancient building sites and with how Roman engineers already raised 70-ton beams at Baalbek and 50-ton blocks at Trajan's Column. Another method that engineers discuss is slow levering. In this approach, the block is brought close to the wall at a slightly lower level. Workers then lever up one side of the stone using long wooden beams and stack more cribbing underneath. They repeat the process on the other side, raising the block a little at a time. Once it sits slightly higher than the final course, they can slide it sideways into position and then take away the temporary supports. This sounds simple, but at Baalbek's scale it would demand huge beams, thick posts sunk deep into the ground, and very careful control so the block does not tilt and crack. Modern teams try to test these ideas with more than guesswork. They build computer models of the sledges, ramps, and posts, and let the software work out how much stress goes into each piece of wood and into the stone itself. Some of those tools now use artificial intelligence to search through many different layouts and see which combinations of slope, track width, and rope positions keep stresses inside safe limits. The wild stories behind these stones. At Baalbek, the blocks that weigh hundreds of tons have pulled in layer after layer of myth, from giants and spirits to aliens and secret landing pads. Long before anyone talked about lasers or artificial intelligence, people standing at the foot of those walls were already saying the same thing. No normal builder could have done this. Some of the oldest myths we know about come from people who actually lived around the ruins. When early Western visitors asked local guides who built the place, the answer was often direct. Villagers said the Great Platform was raised before the flood by giants, at a time when people were much taller and lived much longer than they do now. One report from the early 20th century records locals insisting that no human race since the flood had the strength or the lifespan to move such stones, so the work must belong to an earlier world. Another deep strand of myth ties Baalbek to King Solomon. In Jewish, Christian, and Muslim stories, Solomon is not only a ruler but a man who can command spirits. Later religious writings say he forced beings called jinn to labor for him, building palaces, statues, and great basins of bronze. Jinn are unseen spirits in Islamic belief who can move fast, change shape, and carry heavy loads. From the Middle Ages onward, several texts and travel accounts describe Baalbek as one of Solomon's palaces, built by those jinn and sometimes linked to the visit of the Queen of Sheba. Down in the quarry, the giant block known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman picked up its own special story. Several different legends try to explain that name. One says a pregnant woman promised the townspeople she knew the secret of how to move the stone if they would feed her until she gave birth. Another version says pregnant jinn were ordered to cut and move the block. A third belief says that women who touch the stone will become more fertile. These stories also act as simple answers to awkward questions. If a stone that size still lies half-buried, unfinished, and unused, it invites a hard question. Why did work stop? A tale about a clever woman tricking the town or about spirits getting tired of their task is an easy way to explain an abandoned project without having to think about bad quarry planning, cracked stone, or changing orders from far-off rulers. As European travel grew in the 18th and 19th centuries, Baalbek gained a new set of outside myths. Artists and writers came through the Bekaa Valley, sketched the temples, and wrote glowing descriptions. Many of them leaned on old classical language and called the huge blocks Cyclopean, borrowing the name of the one-eyed giants from Greek myth who were said to have built massive walls. Some drew the podium as a kind of ghost fortress built by unknown hands, with very little sense of how it really fit into Roman history. Those books and sketches went back to Europe and North America and reached people who would never see Lebanon. In the 1960s, the rumors jumped again, this time into the world of ancient astronaut theories. A Swiss writer named Erich von Daniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods that suggested many ancient sites were linked to alien visitors. In his chapter on Baalbek, he described a terrace built from blocks over 65 feet long and claimed some stones weighed nearly 2,000 tons, far higher than most modern estimates. He quoted a Russian professor who suggested the platform might be the remains of a giant airfield or launch pad. Those pages changed the way many people first heard about Baalbek. Instead of reading about Roman gods and local history, they saw photos of the trilithon with captions asking whether rockets once landed there. Later television shows copied the same language. On the internet today, those ideas are everywhere. Many websites and social media pages frame Baalbek as proof of a lost high-tech civilization wiped out by some disaster, with only the stones left behind. Some claim the podium is part of a global energy grid, lined up with the pyramids in Egypt, Stonehenge in England, and temples in Malta, as if the planet itself had been wired by some forgotten group. Others say the giant blocks could only have been cut with machines using heat beams or perfect saws, because they see smooth faces in low-resolution photographs and mistake them for polished metal-like cuts. Thanks for watching. Now check out the videos popping up on screen for more unbelievable stories.